The next day, Alan Atwood sleeps peacefully in his bed. Ah, it's that mysterious man with the gold earrings in his ears. He has a large and rather unusual tattoo on his broad, muscular back. The answering machine on the door lock sounded, "Password correct, door open." A tall, dark-haired man entered. The first thing he saw was Alan asleep. He was covered with a blanket up to his waist, and his powerful back with the mysterious tattoo was defiantly exposed to his visitor. The dark-haired man's name is Nathan, and now he's walked right up to Alan's bed. Nathan threw his shirt on Alan and asked him to get up, for he knew that he was already awake. Alan turned and stretched languidly in bed. He was in no hurry to comply with the intruder's request. "And I wonder who it is that's come. What do you want?" Alan Atwood said in a sleepy, disgruntled voice. Nathan took the TV remote in his hand. The guest said in a stern tone and clicked the remote control. "Breaking news. A case of taking a person's life has been filed. A dead body was found in a famous hotel last night." A news anchor of a popular TV channel broadcast. He added that the victim was on her knees. The woman's body was completely exsanguinated. It was also learned from the news that there were no injuries on the body, and sexual intercourse was recorded before the death. In addition, the hotel did not provide any information about the guest who was staying in the room. It proved impossible to get information from the surveillance cameras. The news ended with the anchor reporting that the police were currently checking the hotel. Nathan asked Alan without turning around, "This is your doing, isn't it?" "Ha, why ask when the answer is already known?" Alan grinned and called his act a work of art, emphasizing that no one else could do it but him. "A work of art?" Nathan blurted out and threw the remote at the man. He had told Alan many times not to cross the line and take people's lives. Alan stood up and started to dress. He ironically said that he had just overdone it a bit, and that it would be easy for the golden son of the Wang family to make it go away. He was referring to the dynasty that owned the Van Group. Nathan asked, puzzled, if Alan realized how many people and money were needed to solve this problem. Alan grimaced, rolling his eyes grudgingly. He suddenly grabbed his guest sharply by the throat. Alan was going to remind Nathan who had made him the owner of all the resources he had not been able to access before. Holding the man tightly, he emphasized that they had been given everything they wanted for generations in exchange for serving him. Nathan could barely squeeze out a word of mercy. Alan warned him that if he ever spoke like that again, he would end up like the woman from the hotel. Of course Nathan understood. Nathan stood at the door and rubbed his throat. Bloody deity, he thought. Meanwhile, Nathan's cell phone rang. Someone reported that regarding the media outlet they were talking about earlier, their reporters have already spread the rumor of Eden Wang's affair. Looks like this news was just in time. If you want to take attention away from some news, you have to cover it with other, more shocking news. At this time, Ryan Howe was trying to prepare a new culinary masterpiece in the kitchen. Holding an ingredient in one hand and his phone in the other, he read the recipe. It said to add 1,000-year-old eggs to the porridge when it thickened. What kind of eggs were those? Switching from the recipe to the cooking itself, Ryan threw in the ingredient he held in his hand and figured it didn't make a difference whether he added more or less. The pot was bubbling with something that looked more like a witch's potion than a culinary masterpiece. Not going to get poisoned, Ryan thought and looked at his cooking contentedly. Suddenly, Jane walked in. God, what is that man doing in the kitchen? Ryan indignantly announced that he was making her porridge, can't you see? Jane covered her nose with her hand and said that of course she had handed him her life, but that didn't mean it was necessary to take her life now, and in this way. What does she even know about it? Plenty of people would only dream of tasting porridge from a celebrity like him. Ryan called Jane a stupid woman. He tried to push Jane away from the table and asked her to leave quickly, or she would only get in his way. The girl suggested that maybe it would be better to just not cook. Ryan Howe asked her not to be annoying. Jane walked toward the exit. As she passed the desk, she heard the sounds of incoming notifications on the phone that lay there. Those were messages from the number 8 members of the Van Group chat room. The chat was discussing the recent news that the identity of the man in a secret relationship with Kathleen Aderly had been revealed. He was the son of the company's owner, Eden Van. This news caused a lot of discussion among the chat participants. In addition, a photo of Eden and Kathleen was also attached to this news. It should be noted that the man's face was not visible, and the girl is definitely Kathleen Aderly, the winner of Best Actress. Some of the participants suggested that this news was purposely launched to divert attention from that hotel news. Some also suggested that Kathleen's ex-boyfriend was Ryan Howe, a spokesman for the company. Eden Van. Apparently no one from the company had actually met him. Jane thought about it, looking at all the chat messages. Jane clicked on the hashtag of the news. The girl enlarged the photo to get a closer look at the man and woman in that photo. No way to see. But somehow the man's face seemed familiar to Jane. Strangely, Jane feels like they've met him somewhere before. Is it really him? Van Group 20 years ago. Paul Wang founded the Van Group Partnership, which later became the Van Group Conglomerate. It took Paul Wang some 6 years to do the unbelievable. He built an entire trading empire. In business circles, this is considered rare good fortune. Only despite this, it's not Paul Wang that people admire the most out of the Wang family. All the glory went to his sons. Nathan Wang is the eldest son. Since childhood, he grew up in the spotlight as the heir to the corporation. Those around him nicknamed him the Pamper of Fortune, Lady Killer, the Prince with the Golden Spoon. The life of his younger brother named Eden Wang, on the other hand, was shrouded in mystery. For the sake of maximizing the protection of Eden Wang's freedom and privacy, the family has bought back every photo ever taken by the paparazzi. The breaking news is that the investigation into the hotel incident involving the woman who was robbed of her life has been completed. Nathan Wang was looking at his clipboard in a puzzled manner. There was a knock at his office. Nathan invited him in and put the tablet away in his desk drawer. "Brother, can we talk?" Eden asked when he entered. Nathan was surprised at his brother's early arrival today, but invited him in. Eden asked about that news about his affair with Kathleen, assuming that his brother was involved. Nathan got up from the table. Eden noted that his brother had organized a meeting that day with a girl he had not even met, and suddenly he had this picture. Eden noted that Kathleen was being talked about as if she were a celebrity, and that the boy was having an affair with her. Nathan put his hands on his brother's shoulders and asked when he had ever paid attention to these useless publications about his private life. Eden stated that he doesn't care about the news, but he is concerned about why his older brother is doing this. The boy guesses that lately there are some problems in the company, which his brother doesn't tell him about. Nathan noted that there had indeed been some difficulties, but that everything had now been solved. Nathan thanked his brother and asked him not to blame him. Eden asked that if his brother needed his help next time, that he just say so and not put him in that uncomfortable position again. The boy admitted that he felt very uncomfortable. Nathan admitted that he had made a mistake and asked him not to be angry. Nathan wondered why his brother was suddenly so affected by the news about the affair. Had Eden fallen in love? The boy answered with an emphatic, "No." However, he admitted that he definitely had a thing for one girl. Nathan fussed curiously around his younger brother. He was curious about the girl, whether she was a fellow student, a foreigner, or Uncle Bob's daughter. Eden answered briefly, "No." The boy said that he met this girl when he was interning at the company. The brother called Eden a slacker, emphasizing that he had sent him to the company to study, and he immediately ran to find a girl. "I'm not talking to you," Eden said indignantly. Nathan put his hand on his brother's shoulder and asked what her name was. For Eden's sake, he was ready to find out everything about her. Nathan answered that he did not want to say her name, because if he knew it, his brother would find out everything about her, down to the third generation in her family. Besides, she didn't know who Eden really was yet. She would have to wait until he confessed to her, and then Eden would introduce them. Nathan was upset that his brother had so many secrets from him. Eden thought for a moment. He really did have secrets. However, when he bowed his head, he noted that his older brother definitely had more secrets than he did. He said this and headed for the exit, so that Nathan would not be distracted from his work. As soon as Eden was outside the door, Nathan immediately called someone. On the phone, he asked someone to help him check which of the female employees his brother had gotten the closest to when he was interning incognito. He also asked to make sure Eden didn't find out anything about it. Jane smiled sweetly. Now she was sitting in the chief's office, and he was staring intently into her eyes. The girl was about to leave, unless the chief had any questions for her. "How do you know Ryan Howe? Quickly speak up. Are you two dating?" The man suddenly blurted out. What kind of interrogation is this?" Jane replied that such talk reflected badly on the star's reputation. The chief was still curious why Ryan had given up all the experienced staff and made the girl his assistant, personally proposing her candidacy during the meeting. Jane was uncomfortable with all these questions. Trying to get away with it sooner, the girl replied that Ryan was a very nice person and probably just wanted to support her. Jane was the only one who knew that in truth, he just wanted her life. The chief lowered his gaze indifferently and said that if she didn't want to talk, she didn't have to. He emphasized that Jane's main task was to ensure that Ryan Howe would not refuse to be the face of their company. Therefore, the annual press conference is very important to them. Did he say annual press conference? Jane tensed. The chief repeated that she hadn't overheard, and whether they could present the new face of the company depended only on her. I see, the girl replied, thinking to herself that Ryan had really been a huge help this time. By the way, it's a good time to ask the question that's been bothering Jane. She asked if by any chance the chief had seen Nancy Freeman, director of finance. He replied that she was on a long-term leave of absence. Jane inquired who requested a vacation in Nancy's place. However, the chief said that she had sent the letter of request herself. It was obvious that he was saddened by this fact, because the departure of the head of the finance department on vacation would hit the team's efficiency hard. Jane was certain that Nancy could not have sent the letter herself. Then who had done it? Standing in the dining room, the women discuss what they will eat for lunch. One of them preferred only coffee, explaining that she was dieting. Her friends didn't understand why she needed coffee if she wasn't fat, but the girl thought that there were 10 kilograms between not fat and slim. Suddenly, one of this female company noticed Jane sitting at one of the tables. The blonde winked that she knew Jane as that girl from the Ryan Howe scandal news. She's like Cinderella. Meanwhile, Jane was picking at her plate of food and thinking only of Nancy Freeman. If someone had specifically requested a vacation for her, maybe she was safe now. Jane's thoughts were interrupted by someone's female voice. The girls who had just been discussing her approached Jane. They asked why she was having lunch alone. Then they introduced themselves as employees from the cosmetics department and asked to sit at a table with her. According to them, Jane was on their floor with Ryan Howe. Jane was a little confused. Ryan Howe, all because of him. The brunette suddenly announced that Jane was now quite an influential figure in the company. Jane was very curious why all of a sudden. The blonde asked Jane not to play dumb, since she was now Mrs. Howe. This surprised Jane even more. One of the girls stated that she too would like to be Ryan Howe's personal assistant, but he personally chose Jane. Wow, that's something you don't see on any show. Looks like the girls weren't going to get behind Jane so easily, and started asking about how she and Ryan met. Jane realized that any words she said now would be cause for gossip and rumors. However, she decided to say that she worked at the cafe where Ryan was her boss. So Ryan Howe understands her situation well, which is why he offered her another job. Jane noted that Ryan takes care of her like an older brother takes care of his sister. The girls had a friendly admiration for Ryan Howe out loud. They also thought he was a wonderful man. Soon the girls were already just having fun, changing the subject. Jane looked at them and remembered herself and Emily. Once upon a time they had had fun just like this. But as time passed, the memories of it began to dissipate. And in that instant, Jane realized that death was oblivion. The girl sat for a while immersed in her own thoughts. One of the new acquaintances suddenly patted her hand. The girl asked Jane if she'd heard that the company's second heir, Eden Wang, was interning here incognito. She meant the one who had been on the news yesterday. The blonde suggested that it was likely that Jane had interned with him at the same time, and she wondered if she had seen him. Jane tried to make a carefree appearance and replied that she hadn't seen him. Now, thinking back to that time, Jane exits the auditorium. The girl stood in front of the food vending machine to choose something to eat. "Did you sneak out too?" asked Eden Wan, standing behind. The guy smiled and asked if she'd let him through to the machine if she hadn't made up her mind herself yet. Jane didn't mind. Eden remarked aloud that he hadn't even realized that the rookie training session would last so long. Jane joked that it was because the 49-page corporate code seemed to be 49 pages long. The guy laughed. Who wrote that code in the first place? Eden laughed and couldn't stop laughing. Jane was having fun too. She asked the boy to be quiet though, or they might get caught. The fun subsided and the guy introduced himself as intern Eden and bought Jane a drink. Jane also introduced herself by giving her name. She thanked Eden for the drink, he said. No need to thank him since they were both truant after all. After a while, the two were sitting on the steps eating ice cream. Eden remarked that letting go of a dream was also a kind of courage. Jane replied wryly that if you couldn't comfort, you shouldn't even start. But the boy still wanted to try again. It's worth mentioning that at the time, Jane couldn't afford the cost of advanced training and had to let go of her dream of becoming a news anchor. Jane wondered why Eden had come to this company for an internship. Eden admitted that his older brother had sent him here. Jane had thought at the time that his brother must have cared for him very much. Since then, Jane and Eden had become friends who had no secrets from each other, even if they hadn't realized it at the time. After her internship ended, Jane never met Eden again. The girl even wondered what departments the other trainees were assigned to, but no one could answer her question. Jane was distracted from her memories. At this time, her new acquaintances were actively discussing the Wang brothers, arguing about which of them was more attractive. They were talking about which of them would be more suitable for which brother. The blonde suddenly turned to Jane, wondering who she would choose. That would be a hard question to answer right away. Jane thought about it. Two images appeared in her mind. Nathan and Eden. Which one was better? Oh, of course it's the devil Ryan Howe. He's clearly the handsomest of them all. Come on, even in her mind he's not giving her peace of mind. Ryan Howe's voice rang clearly in the girl's head. He was saying that Jane could only choose him. Mentally, Jane chased the image of the devil out of her head. Luckily, the phone rang. Oh, good timing. Wow, it's a text from Ryan. He says he found something and it might be a lead. Ryan Howe invited Jane to come over to his house tonight. Ryan Howe greeted Jane with words about why she was taking so long. Jane explained that she'd been rushing as fast as she could after work, but he didn't have a single bus stop near his house. Ryan wryly asked Jane if she couldn't drive. Jane looked at Ryan. He was very handsome. Straight from the red carpet? She asked. Ryan replied that he was back early and asked the girl not to be too impressed. Holding up the picture frame to her, Ryan smiled and asked, "I look good today, don't I?" Jane noticed that he smelled so much of his cologne that she couldn't think. Ryan Howe called the girl an iron lady and asked if she had any interest in men. He was outraged that he was so handsome and Jane wasn't even embarrassed to see him. And he actually got 2 million likes on Instagram today in that outfit. Jane recalled that he'd said something about leads, and that's what she'd come here for. Ryan tossed her some kind of envelope. Jane opened the envelope and in her hands were printouts of the latest news, which she already knew about as it was. "Is that it?" she asked disappointedly. Ryan Howe asked Jane to look more closely and pay special attention to the dates. The girl looked more closely. Jane noted that all these events had happened in a short period of time, and some of them even on the same day, but she didn't understand where Ryan was going with this. The man explained that after each publication about the woman's death, a sensation was sure to come out in the next 24 hours. Ryan then pulled the rest of the printouts out of the envelope and asked Jane to look at them as well. It was news from the last 10 or so years. Jane looked at it and concluded that it was all about the Van Group. Ryan pointed out that the news about the Van Group always appeared on the same day as crime stories, and their ratings were quite high. Does he mean to say that the company is purposely dragging the public's attention on purpose? Ryan said that's exactly what he meant. But Jane still couldn't figure out what their case had to do with the news. Ryan Howe stated in a serious tone that these crimes are not the work of man. God, Jane was taken aback by his words. Was there really another devil besides him? Ryan Howe replied that it was probably the work of an angel. That was very strange to hear. Jane wanted to say that if it was an angel, then it... But Ryan continued her sentence with the words, "Then he's good, right?" He then asked Jane if she thought Ryan Howe was bad. The girl thought for a moment. "If my answer was yes, I wouldn't be sitting here," she said, and gently ruffled the hair on the devil's head. Devil Ryan Howe gently removed Jane's hands, emphasizing that he'd spent 40 minutes on that style at the barber shop. Jane quipped that it was no wonder his hair was so sticky then. The man looked in the mirror and tried to arrange his hair normally again. Jane thought aloud that if he was really an angel who took people's lives, it was worth finding out how dangerous he was. Admiring his reflection, Ryan Howe uttered, "Danger? What is danger?" Jane sighed. Why was she suddenly worried about him? He didn't care. By the way, Jane said she tried to find out about Nancy Freeman today, and it turns out she sent a letter to the post office asking for a long-term leave of absence. Nancy, meanwhile, woke up in a place she didn't understand. Struggling to open her eyes, there were only two questions in her mind: how long she had slept, and where she was now. Nancy's mind suddenly conjured up blurry images of being carried by a man into a van, and the words that she would be transported as a VIP client. The girl desperately jerked the arm to which the IV catheter was attached. The nurse's sharp voice told Nancy not to pull it out. She warned that if you jerked it like that, you could lose blood. The girl lifted herself from the bed and began begging the nurse to save her and call the police, explaining that she had been kidnapped and brought here. She also added that her name was Nancy Freeman. The nurse was silent for a while, and Nancy speculated aloud that she was in league with those kidnappers. The girl looked around and said she didn't know what she was talking about. The nurse made it clear to her that she was only responsible for Nancy's medication. God, but Nancy knows she's not sick. What other drugs are they injecting her with here? Just sedatives. Keep your voice down, Miss Grace Adamson, the nurse replied. Grace Adamson? Interjected Nancy. But there was only silence in response. Nancy boiled up and repeated that her name was Nancy Freeman and that she was the director of the financial department of the Van Group, adding that this information could be found on the internet. The girl doesn't understand why she was brought here. Perhaps she has been mistaken for someone else and this is a mistake. Nancy grabbed the nurse's hand and asked her to help her. Nancy was willing to give anything she asked for. However, the nurse said that the girl just needed to rest and get some sleep. Nancy asked that the girl just check her words, but the nurse already had a syringe of sleeping pills in her hands. I'll be waiting, Nancy managed to say before she passed out from the injection. Nurse Esther asked Nurse Millie if she wanted to have dinner together. Millie replied that she was not hungry and wanted to finish her report. Esther decided to go to dinner alone. Bye, see you later, Millie waved her hand. After waiting for her coworker to leave, Millie walked over to the computer and looked around anxiously. Making sure no one was around, the girl typed into the search engine, Nancy Freeman's Van Group. Millie clicked on the first result the search engine gave her. Watching the video, Millie suddenly pressed pause. It looked like that girl in the room was telling the truth, and she was really Nancy Freeman, the director of the finance department at the Van Group. The nurse opened the clinic's patient file. The card at number 39 had Nancy's picture on it. However, her chart said she was Grace Adamson, unemployed with a hereditary mental disorder. Millie was curious as to what had happened. Nancy? Nancy Freeman? Wake up! The nurse tried desperately to wake the girl. The girl only mumbled inarticulately. Nancy's blurred vision could see now only the indistinct silhouette of Nurse Millie. She asked what she would get for helping Nancy. Millie immediately warned her that she mustn't lose her job. Nancy said she could give her all her money. She also said that they had a girl named Jane working for the company and asked that Millie give her the message that Nancy was at the clinic. The nurse promised to look for this Jane tomorrow morning. Remember, you promised me, Nancy said. The door to the room was ajar, and it seemed someone else had witnessed Nancy's conversation with the nurse. A coworker approached Jane and informed her that she was being looked for at the entrance. Jane asked who was looking for her, but the girl didn't know for sure and assumed it was someone from their company. Meanwhile, Jane was waiting in the hallway for some girl. What kind of stranger wants to meet Jane? The girl really wanted to find out soon. Only Jane approached the stranger and barely had time to say hello to her before the girl took Jane's hand and led her away from people. The stranger put a note in Jane's hand and told her to come to this address in the evening. Jane wanted to read the note, but the girl squeezed her hand and told her not to look until she left. After that, the girl hurriedly left without saying a word about who she even was. Jane stood there puzzled. However, as soon as the girl was out of sight, Jane immediately opened the note. There was an address written on it and that Nancy Freeman was there. Jane quickly headed for the exit, and when she met the first colleague, she asked him to take time off from the boss for her. She explained that she had an urgent matter and could not stay. Jane left before the guy could even think about it. He asked Jane what department she was from, but she didn't hear anything. A moment later, Jane was on the phone with Ryan telling her that she was a stupid woman and that the girl should have been detained. He was outraged that Jane had gotten him involved, not knowing if he could trust the information he'd gotten. The guard told Ryan that he was being too harsh Jane explained that she had tried to catch up with the stranger, but she had left too quickly. She still had to check it out, whether the information was accurate or not. Ryan Howe replied that he understood and promised to meet already on site. Sitting in the car, Ryan urged the driver to go faster. Soon all three of them, Ryan Howe, the guard, and Jane, were moving briskly toward the clinic entrance. Here they were already entering the lobby. Through the glass doors of the clinic, you could see trucks departing from the building. 3 container trucks pulled away from the hospital. In each lay a girl patient, strapped tightly to the gurneys. They were all unconscious. Nancy was also on one of these gurneys. Upon entering the main hallway, the trio of heroes were very puzzled by what they saw. The building was completely empty. Only the scattered equipment and the mess around them indicated that work had recently been going on. It looked as if the building had been left in a hurry. Jane rushed to search the closet. Ryan Howe inspected all the beds in the clinic rooms. The guard looked in literally every corner. Soon, all 3 were standing together to share the results of the search with each other. But when asked if there was any evidence left, both Ryan Howe and the guard said they had found nothing. Jane turned to Ryan with a pleading tone in her voice. He understood immediately and sent a guard outside to make sure no one got in. When the guard left, Jen apologized to Ryan for constantly making him use his power. But he said that words were useless now and asked her to just catch him when it was over. Ryan Howe began his transformation. His eyes turned black with bright red pupils. With his power, Devil Ryan Howe saw the men gathering and carrying all the necessary equipment out of the clinic. There were a lot of men, and they were all busy. All the men are in identical uniforms, and each man is clearly doing his job. What the hell is going on here? Some men were packing up, while others were wheeling out patients on gurneys. The devil perked up his ears. That same hour, he heard a multitude of female voices, and each one begging for help, asking to be let go, threatening, or proving their mental health. One of the girls shouted to remove the drugs. Another promised she wouldn't let them get away with it, calling them the real villains. But what the devil saw a moment later made him especially focused. This was Alan Atwood. He asked the clinic administrator to remember to hire new staff after the move, emphasizing that she needed to know what would happen if it happened again. "Oh, that's him," thought the devil. "Looks like Ryan Howe knew him." Suddenly, Alan stopped. The girl asked if he wanted anything else. Alan Atwood stood and seemed to be listening to something. What on earth is he doing? Ryan Howe became wary. No way, does Alan really see him now, despite Ryan Howe being in the future? Alan Atwood turned to the receptionist and asked her not to linger, to act quickly, and under no circumstances to leave anything important here. The girl obeyed. "Stop!" the devil Ryan Howe uttered to Alan, who was standing with his back to him. The one didn't turn around and began to extend his hand towards Ryan, stating that he didn't like being spied on, and especially not if it was Mr. Devil. After that, Alan Atwood turned around. His eyes turned fiery golden, and a powerful stream of destructive energy flowed from his hand. This stream rushed straight at the devil, causing him inexplicable pain. The devil turned back into a man, and already in real time in the clinic, he began to fall, only managing to shout Jane's name. The girl rushed to Ryan Howe for help. Holding the man down, she tried to shout to him to wake up. Jane was very frightened. "Ryan Howe! Ryan!" Jane called out in desperation. The girl touched the devil's head and noted that he had a fever. Jane realized that something had gone wrong, because things were completely different now than the last time the devil Ryan Howe had used his power. Jane called loudly to the guard for help. Soon Ryan Howe was taken to the intensive care unit. Doctors noted that the patient was unconscious and his breathing was shallow. They ordered a defibrillator to be prepared. The doctors did their job quickly and cohesively. Behind the glass door, a frightened Jane watched the proceedings. In her mind, she really wanted him to be all right. The guard saw the girl's worries and tried to calm her down as best he could. Jane mentally turned to Ryan Howe. The girl asked that he not leave her. At the first opportunity, the guard asked the nurse how Mr. Ryan was doing. He was told that the cause of his coma had not yet been determined. His test results are very bad, and the doctors have done everything they can. Now we just have to wait. The guard brought Jane a bag of food and offered her a snack, but the girl replied that she couldn't even eat a bite. It was late evening and Jane was still sitting outside the room. The doctor was surprised that she was still here and suggested that Jane drive home, promising to let Jane know when Ryan Howe regained consciousness. But Jane still wanted to wait so that Ryan would see her when he woke up. When the doctor left, Jane went to the door to Ryan's room. She stepped up to the window and peered in. The girl looked through the glass. The devil, so strong, seemingly even omnipotent, was now lying on a hospital bed and looked defenseless. Jane figured that if he just waited like that, he wouldn't wake up. And if the doctors can't save his life, maybe she can? Morning came. There were various hissing sounds of medical devices in Ryan Howe's room. Finally, Ryan Howe opened his eyes. The guard was just standing over his boss so as not to miss the moment when he woke up. When he did, the guard immediately wailed tearfully that the gentleman had scared the hell out of him. Ryan declared that if he got the guard's tears and snot on his face, he would definitely die on the spot. Vigorously looking around, Ryan Howe immediately asked indignantly where that unscrupulous woman had gone. It's the same thing every time. The man thought that as a superstar, he deserved to be taken care of 24 hours a day. Now he was going to write everything about her in his notebook. Ryan wondered if there was anything more important than him. The guard frowned and said that Miss Jane couldn't come to him. I wonder why that is. Ryan jumped up from his bunk. He urgently needed to know what his bodyguard meant. The guard explained that Jane was lying in the next room. Ryan whirled to the next room and, opening the door, called out loudly to Jane. When he saw that the girl didn't react, he moved closer. Ryan asked that Jane not pretend and even tried to open one of her eyes himself. "What are you trying to do?" the doctor who had suddenly entered asked. Ryan jumped up and shook the doctor, asking what was wrong with Jane. The doctor barely managed to reply that she was fine. Ryan pointed out that just yesterday this girl was beautiful and rosy-cheeked, but what about her now? Ryan emphasized that even a shriveled corpse looked better than she did now. The doctor was puzzled by this comparison. The man asked Ryan not to worry so much and to just listen. He stated that this girl was fine yesterday. Now she is dehydrated, accompanied by exhaustion. According to the doctor, the girl fainted in Ryan's room and was found by the nurse on duty. The fact that Jane fainted next to the devil explained a lot. Ryan Howe needed to test his hunch, so he asked the doctor to leave him alone with Jane. She couldn't have, could she? With those thoughts in mind, Ryan approached the headboard of the hospital bed. Carefully pulling back the collar of her shirt, Ryan found several bite-like marks on Jane's neck. The man quietly called her stupid. He didn't think there was any reason for her to take such a risk, because Ryan only needed more sleep. Ryan Howe leaned over the girl, and closing his eyes, touched his lips to her forehead. Ryan knew the girl couldn't hear him right now, but nevertheless he wished the girl a good dream, and promised that he wouldn't charge this time. Wow, Jane was really dreaming something wonderful. In the dream, her long-time dream came true. She became an anchor woman. Jane was happy and smiling. Then she dreamed she came home, and that her friend Emily lives next door, who is fine, thankfully. Holding hands, the girls enter the apartment together. There, in the dream, behind the closed door of the apartment where Emily lives, the two friends met again. In the dream, Jane was happy, because all her dreams had finally come true. In reality, tears ran from Jane's eyes. Ryan Howe knew she was definitely having a good dream, so why was she crying? In the meantime, some man had come with a confident stride to his desired destination. At the gatehouse, he was asked to show his passport. The guard looked at the document and clarified the guest's name, after which he handed over the document and thanked me for my cooperation. "I'm back," the man said proudly to himself and looked straight ahead. A huge sign on the building read, "Van Group, 20 years in service, true to our roots." "True to our roots," the man repeated aloud. Is this some kind of joke?" He smiled. Jane drinks juice while sitting relaxed on a bench. The warm spring wind rustles the leaves on the trees. It's been 3 days since the attempt to free Nancy Freeman. Looks like the chain of custody is broken. Jane's cell phone suddenly rang. I got a message from Ryan Howe. He had been forced to develop a new strategy. And now Ryan wanted to let you know that he had signed a base contract with the Van Group. Now Ryan Howe is in charge of scouting the situation at the Van Group. A bodyguard has taken over the hotel crime case, and Jane must take care of restoring her health. One thing was certain. They wouldn't stop until they found her. Finishing her juice, Jane threw the empty packet into the trash can. The girl realized that it was necessary to get well as soon as possible because health is the capital of the revolution. Now she would do some exercise, and her strength would return to her body. Just a little more, and all the criminals would be in trouble. Jane was approached by a girl from the medical staff of the clinic where she was being treated. Jane thought it was time for rounds, but the girl said that Jane had a visitor. Smiling embarrassedly, the girl noted that Jane's guest was so handsome. Did Ryan Howe arrive so quickly? As she left, the nurse remarked that there were a lot of good-looking guys around Jane. I wonder what she means. Jane followed the nurse but stopped suddenly. She was haunted by the feeling that she was being watched. Or maybe Jane was just too impressionable lately. The nurse asked what was wrong, but Jane decided to pull herself together and they went into the building. In the room, there were a bunch of different boxes and a whole basket of fruit on a table. Jane's visitor was Eden Wang, and now he was pacing back and forth in the room, rehearsing the words he might say to Jane when they met. It had been so long since they had seen each other, and now he had no idea what would be the best thing to say. Eden ran through a bunch of phrases in his head. Everything he'd thought he'd say when they met seemed so old-fashioned to him now. He patted his cheeks in frustration. Suddenly, Eden heard voices outside the door and was confused. Among the voices was Jane's familiar voice. The girl entered the room and was very surprised to see her fellow student there. Eden smiled toward Jane, noting that they hadn't seen each other in a while. In room number 309, longtime friends met. Jane learned that right after that training, Eden had gone to study abroad again. Now it was clear why she hadn't seen him again after the internship ended. Eden confessed that being overseas, he often thought back to the time they had spent together with Jane. In addition, he was very sorry for hiding his identity back then, so now he wanted to apologize to Jane. The girl wasn't quite sure what exactly he wanted to apologize for. Jane told Eden that he had nothing to apologize for, since non-disclosure of identity was his right. Besides, the guy's situation was pretty specific too. Jane was sure that if he'd told her all that, she wouldn't have believed him, and she would have called him a liar. Eden didn't understand why he was a liar. Jane explained that if he was handsome and rich, he must be a liar, because there were no such men in nature. Eden blushed. He was embarrassed that Jane had called him handsome, but the girl relaxed, saying that she was just stating a fact, and she had tastes like any other normal person. At that moment, another visitor, Ryan Howe, came to Jane with a package in his hand. He strode confidently into the room and announced that her star courier had arrived. Seeing another man in the room, Ryan felt a sense of inexplicable anger. Who the hell is this guy next to Jane? Eden looked at the guest who had entered and thought about the fact that he had seen him on television. Ryan Howe looked at the boy, then at Jane. He was now trying to tell Jane with his mind that she had better explain why an inferior man was in her room. Ryan Howe made a whole speech in his mind, but in reality he couldn't get a word out of himself and just mumbled. Jane couldn't understand what was wrong with him. Eden stood up, gave his name, and extending his hand to Ryan, introduced himself as Jane's friend. "Jane?" Ryan interjected irritably. Eden repeated himself and asked the man what his name was. Ryan Howe was outraged that there is still someone in this country who doesn't know the famous Ryan Howe. Is that even normal? Jane laughed and asked Ryan if it was necessary to be angry about it. The girl then turned to Eden. She apologized, explaining that it's Ryan Howe's top idol and he's always like that, so it's not worth paying attention. Ryan resentfully stated that he was lying down in the hospital, even though he had just gotten out of it. Jane laughed. Eden simply remained silent in bewilderment. Those words made the guy think, oh, so that's it, so he has a rival. Ryan Howe, in his indignation, almost forgot that he had brought Jane something to eat. He puffed up resentfully and handed the girl a bag of food. A man entered Nathan Wang's office. He told him that this afternoon his brother had gone to the hospital to check on one of the company's employees, and that it was probably the girl Nathan wanted to find out about. He said this and handed the boss a package with everything he had found on the girl. As soon as the man had left, Nathan looked at everything he had brought him. Suddenly he saw something that made him tense up. In the girl's file, under family ties, it said that Jane's father, Jordan Blair, was listed as missing in action. How is that possible? The fact that Jane was Jordan Blair's daughter surprised and alarmed Nathan. Meanwhile, Jane slept peacefully in her room. A man named Jordan leaned over Jane's hospital bed. His eyes were full of sadness. Eden exchanged phone numbers with Jane. When he was already at home, he sent her a message saying, "I came by unannounced today. I hope I didn't interfere with your vacation." Jane replied that she was glad to meet an old friend. Oh wow, she said she was glad. Eden thought he'd have to find a cute post-it to answer. His brother was already waiting for him at the house. Nathan's presence was unexpected. Eden confessed to his brother that he had scared him. Nathan noticed that Eden looked happy and asked if something good had happened to him. Eden waved it off, replying that he was just meeting a friend. "With Jane Blair?" inquired Nathan abruptly. Eden wondered how his brother could have known that. Was Nathan sending someone to follow him again? His brother explained that he was just worried about the friends Eden was making. The heir to the Wang dynasty must realize that there are countless eyes on their every move. "Jane Blair is taboo," Nathan told his younger brother unhesitatingly. Eden did not understand why. Nathan had said that it was all about her name and that he absolutely forbade contact with anyone named Blair. Nathan did not mind anyone, but he told him to forget about Jane. Eden wondered if he could find out the reason for this categorization, or could it no longer be talked about? Nathan thought for a long time, and Eden said nervously that if his brother did not give one reasonable reason, he would not change his plan. What was the plan? The boy admitted that he liked Jane and was going to get her this time. The next day, Jane is packing her things because her treatment has ended. Jane suddenly heard the nurse talking to a man. He said he'd stopped by to check on someone, but he had to go. Jane listened. The man's voice sounded very familiar to Jane. The girl quickly went to the nurse and asked where the man she had just talked to was. The nurse said that he had already left. Jane ran in the direction the nurse said the man had gone. The girl knew to whom that voice belonged, and she could not confuse it with any other. For it had been him then too, Jane Blair's school years. A lot of people with colorful umbrellas are coming out of the school. It's raining heavily. From everywhere you can hear parents talking to their children. Jane listened to all this talk, and in her heart she was very much offended. She stood all alone in the crowd of people with umbrellas. Only the sound of torrents of rain hitting the sidewalk hissed everywhere. The girl could hear the words of the people walking beside her. A mother walking with her son looked back and saw Jane. The woman asked her son if it was the same girl who was in the same class with him. She also noted that Jane was the best student, even though her parents did not care about their own daughter. The boy said that Jane does not socialize with anyone and is not particularly friendly. In addition, there were a lot of problems from her because people who were persecuting her father came to school. The boy's mother was horrified by this news and told her son not to bully his classmate. Jane was still standing outside the school. She was very sad that she was without an umbrella. The girl couldn't wait for the rain to stop. Suddenly, a strange man walked towards her. He walked right up to Jane and stopped. The man inquired whether the girl's mom didn't show up for the final parent-teacher conference. "And you are Mom's friend?" Jane asked timidly. The man didn't think that was the right wording. Without saying anything extra, he handed the girl a yellow umbrella and told her to hurry back home and remember to dress warmly. Jane clutched the umbrella to her chest and thanked the strange uncle. He just silently turned around and walked away. The girl suddenly called out to the man and asked him to stop. He did. "You're Daddy, aren't you?" asked Jane with hope in her childish, naive eyes. It was raining heavily that day, and Jane couldn't hear his answer. Now an adult, Jane rushes down the hospital corridor hoping to catch up with the man who had the same voice as the uncle who gave her the umbrella that day. Maybe he hadn't answered her at all that day, but she felt it was her father. The girl nervously pressed the elevator button and begged for the door to open faster. The door opened and Jane sank down. She realized she hadn't made it in time. Ryan Howe came out of the elevator. When he saw Jane, he assumed she had come out to meet him. He then asked where Jane's things were. The girl replied that since he had come, she would go get them now. Jane looked tired. Ryan Howe asked how she was doing, if she was hurting or if anyone had hurt her. The girl asked him to just drive her home. Of course he would. That's why Ryan Howe was here. But the sight of the girl made him ask again if she was okay. Jane is sorting through a bag in her apartment. Ryan asked if Jane was sure she wanted to stay here and what was wrong with his apartment. Jane wanted to stay home. Ryan Howe reminded the girl that an unknown person had broken into her house not too long ago. What would happen if someone threatened her safety again? Jane noted that it is still unknown whether Nancy Freeman is alive, and they have no leads left. The girl is afraid that they will have a chance to get the kidnappers only in one case. But Jane doesn't feel fear and she's not going to run away. She's ready to fight. Ryan Howe looked at Jane with admiration. Then he looked at the bag he'd brought with him and thought, Maybe he should give it to her right now. It's about time. But suddenly the doorbell rang. And who is it? Ryan wondered. Jane didn't know. She wasn't expecting anyone. It was a courier. After confirming Jane's details, he said he had a package for her. Jane closed the door and looked at the box in puzzlement. Ryan was eager to find out what was in it. The girl noticed that she hadn't ordered anything. Jane looked at the delivery note and saw that the package was from Eden. Ryan Howe also had time to read the sender's name. He thought about what this human creep needed after all. Jane finally opened the box. Wow, what's so pretty? It looks like a weekend dress. Ryan Howe knew it was this year's top model from a famous designer. But why would Eden give it to him? Jane didn't know. The gift also came with a note asking Eden not to deny him the pleasure of accompanying Jane to the Van Group's annual press conference the following week. Ryan Howe went ballistic. He ordered Jane to send the dress back. The girl was taken aback by this reaction. "Open it," Ryan Howe said as he tossed Jane his gift bag. Jane opened the bag and there was another dress in it. Unlike the first, it was black in color. Jane pointed out that the two dresses were worth more than her salary for 6 months. "I'd say 2 years," Ryan Howe emphasized. Standing behind him, the man asked what dress Jane would choose, noting that she needed to make up her mind. Ryan wondered if Eden had decided to get Jane with the dress. He thought it was ridiculous, since Jane wasn't corrupt. Jane replied in confusion that she wouldn't choose any of them. Ryan didn't immediately understand the meaning of her words. A moment later, however, there was an expression of deep surprise and indignation on his face at the same time. Jane smiled and said she had already decided what dress she was going to wear. The girl walked over to the closet. At the very bottom of the closet is that cherished Jane box. The girl remembered how Emily had once bought a sewing machine specifically to make her a dress. "Can I not wear that hackwork you're sewing?" Jane asked her friend ironically then. However, Emily assured her that Jane would definitely have to wear it. She wanted her friend to wear the dress to the wedding. The sounds of the sewing machine remain in Jane's memory to this day. Jane stated to Ryan that she already had a dress from her personal designer. 6 days until the press conference, Ryan Howe is absorbed in the filming process. 5 days before the press conference, the stylist explains to Jane what costume to use for which event. Jane must make sure to write everything down, memorize it, and not forget or miss anything. 4 days until the press conference, and Ryan Howe and Jane are getting pretty tired of all the filming and fans. 3 days before the press conference, Jane is studying the script of the event. She has been told a lot of nuances that must be taken into account, and nothing must be mixed up. 2 days before the press conference, Jane and Ryan met with the security guard to see if there was any progress on the hotel crime. He said that something happened 3 months before the incident. He was asked to be quick about it. 1 day before the press conference, the Louis X building. Ryan's car pulled up in front of the building. Ryan Howe looked in the mirror to make sure there was nothing wrong with his hair and overall appearance. After making sure everything was perfect, the man got ready to go. Jane asked if she could go with him. Ryan assured her that there was no need to worry, because it was just a private meeting, and in such a place. He believed that nothing terrible could happen. Still, Jane didn't understand why Nathan Van had invited Ryan to the meeting the day before the press conference. Ryan Howe reminded him that he was not an ordinary person. Besides, there should be a lot of influential people from the Van Group at today's meeting, and it was a good chance to get more information. Ryan Howe looked at Jane with a special tenderness and smiled. He then asked that the guard get the girl home safely. That was his assignment for the day. Whereupon Ryan Howe got out of the car. Jane wanted to stop him, but Ryan said goodbye and told her to expect good news from him. Jane was very uneasy at heart. The guard tried to calm Jane, assuring her that everything would be all right and that there was nothing beyond Mr. Howe's control. True enough, Jane agreed, thinking about the fact that he was being labeled the devil after all. The guard was about to take Jane home, but she asked to be dropped off at the candy store beforehand. The girl was going to make some sweets. Ryan Howe is trying so hard, so we should make him something as a reward. Meanwhile, Ryan Howe arrived at the designated meeting place. At the entrance to the restaurant, he was greeted and invited to come through. Nathan Wang met Ryan in person and thanked him for agreeing to come to the meeting. Ryan Howe also welcomed Nathan. Nathan said that it was an honor to meet Ryan, and that he had wanted to talk to him for a long time. Then Nathan added that his good friend, Mr. Alan Atwood, also wanted to meet Ryan. The name hurt Ryan's ears. Oh, what a meeting. This is something Ryan Howe certainly didn't expect. "You?" was all he could say, looking at Alan's smug grin. Alan Atwood sat on a large sofa surrounded by girls. His friends sat in chairs next to each other with their companions as well. "Here we meet, superstar," Alan stated wryly. Pouring wine into his glass, Ryan was complimented that he was more attractive in real life than on screen. With those words, one of the girls offered Ryan Howe a drink. Ryan Howe wondered why he had been called here. After all, there was no way Alan could have found out about his and Jane's plan. Maybe they'd been separated on purpose. He was also worried that if the skirmish was right there, it would hurt the others present as well. Alan smirked contemptuously. It was amazing to him that the devil could care about the fate of useless people. "I'm going to cry," he thought ironically, reading the devil's mind. All he really had to do was snap his fingers and everyone here would die. Alan Atwood was very cocky, and his smirk was really annoying to Ryan. He frowned in a way that made the girl sitting next to him think she'd already said something wrong. Alan Atwood remarked that since the girl had insulted the representative of their company, she should be punished. With these words, he touched her neck with his hand. With a harsh tone, the devil ordered Alan to take his hands off the girl and grab the man's arm tightly. Alan admonished Ryan for grabbing rather hard. His hand became as hot as fire. Ryan Howe pulled his hand back sharply, burning himself. Entering the restroom, Alan asked Ryan why his hand was red. Ryan Howe looked at his palm and was surprised to see that Alan had managed to burn his skin. How many human souls has he consumed? Ryan Howe washes his hands and thinks about whether he can defeat this creep while in his devilish guise. However, all his thoughts boiled down to only one thing, that he missed Jane madly. He was about to pull out his phone and call Jane to at least hear her voice. All for that man? That woman? Alan's voice sounded next to Ryan. I wonder what he wants. Alan wondered what was so special about that woman that she'd gotten the devil himself to serve her. Serve? Ryan interjected. Alan Atwood came up close to Ryan and said that the devil can't have feelings for a human being, can he? Suddenly, his eyes lit up with a fiery golden light. Alan smiled evilly and said that the devil didn't even have a heart. Would he suffer like a normal person, assuming something happened to his woman? The devil told Alan to shut up. Just dare to touch her and I will destroy you, Ryan Howe said threateningly, and his eyes began to redden with rage. Ah, how frightening, laughed Alan Atwood, right in the devil's face. The man stated to Ryan that he shouldn't throw around loud words. After saying that, Alan soared upwards and disappeared. Ryan Howe was furious. What a bummer. In this condition, the devil will never catch up with him. Ryan Howe was mad at himself for not being in the best shape for such a confrontation. Mentally, he asked Jane to wait for him and disappeared as well. At the same time, Jane had just finished making the sweets and came out of the candy store. It was very cold outside. Jane thought only about how the meeting at Ryan Howe's was going. Immersed in her thoughts, the girl stumbled. There was an unexplainable rumbling sound, and a silhouette flashed across the night sky. Jane froze. Alan Atwood came face to face with her and looked directly into the girl's eyes, noting that she was the most ordinary-looking person in the world. Jane stood motionless, unable to say anything or move. There was only a mute question in her eyes. The box of candy fell out of her hands and hit the sidewalk. Jane coughed. Alan Atwood grabbed the girl by the throat and squeezed so hard that Jane couldn't breathe. She barely had the strength to ask to be let go. Alan asked Jane what was so special about her that she was able to attract even the devil. What did you do to Ryan Howe? She asked Jane, barely breathing, through the words. Alan marveled that being in this position, this girl wasn't worried about someone else. He held Jane by the throat with one hand and ran the other over her body. You want to worry? Worry about yourself, he said and flashed his eyes. That hour, huge white wings grew behind his back. Wow, was this man really an angel? Contrary to all stereotypes, this angel was terrifying. Alan Atwood rustled his wings and appeared before the girl in his true form, calling it a gift from God. Jane looked at him in amazement. There was no fear in her eyes, only surprise and anxiety. Angel Alan Atwood picked up the girl and soared with her somewhere upward. A second later, he was already standing with Jane on the very edge of the roof of the Van Group building. Jane desperately fluttered her legs in the air. Angel held her by the throat on an outstretched arm, so that at any moment he could have let go, and Jane would have fallen from the height of a multi-story building. She knew what this place was. Alan confirmed her guess, saying it was the same place where her friend had crashed. Jane spat contemptuously at the angel. The man only laughed back, mockingly suggesting that the girl didn't like the view. But he had chosen this place on purpose, because he wanted both Jane and her girlfriend to die in the same place. Jane tried to call out to Ryan Howe. Alan Atwood loosened his grip a little and started the countdown with the number 5, 4, and he took 2 fingers off the girl's neck. 3. He was now holding Jane's neck with 2 fingers. He then said that Jane's savior wasn't coming, so it was time to go to Emily's girlfriend. Missing 2 and 1 in his countdown, the angel let the girl go. Jane flew down from a huge skyscraper. She fell and thought, "Is this really how it's going to end?" Jane wasn't afraid for herself even now. She was only hurt that she'd never gotten revenge for her friend. As she fell down, she mentally apologized to Emily. Tears came to Jane's eyes. But suddenly, through her tears, Jane saw a blurry but painfully familiar silhouette in the sky. Was it Ryan Howe? "Jane!" he shouted, trying to catch up with the falling girl. Jane falls and seems about to reach the ground. He flew so fast that sparks and feathers flew from his wings. Oh, Ryan Howe made it. He caught Jane on the fly and wrapped his arms around her tightly. Immediately, they flew upward. Standing on the roof of the building, Ryan Howe put his arm around Jane and whispered that she didn't have to be afraid because he was there for her now. "You're a little late, Mr. Devil," the angel said, folding his arms, with his usual nasty grin. Devil Ryan Howe replied that it wasn't Alan's place to call him Mr. Hiding Jane behind his back, he announced that from now on it was a battle of just the 2 of them. Ryan turned his head slightly toward Jane and tried to reassure her by telling her that nothing would happen to him. "You should hurry up," Ryan Howe added. "Oh no, what's he up to?" Jane was worried sick. She suddenly remembered asking Ryan what would happen if he used the superpower. Then he replied that he'd never tried it before. But he can't use it right now, can he?" "Ryan Howe, don't!" yelled Jane desperately, trying to stop something irreversible from happening. But Ryan Howe has already begun his creepy transformation, and now he had changed beyond recognition. He was no longer just a man with horns, red eyes, and claws, but a creature as black as night. And he was terrifying just by the sight of him. Jane once again called out the devil by name, but he could only make an eerie, inhuman sound. "Wow, so that's what you are," the angel said, pulling on his goofy smile, adding that it was the only way the devil was capable of reaching him. The devil lunged fiercely at the upstart. He hit Alan with a force he had never experienced before. The angel, spurting blood, flew back a few meters from such a blow. Shattering several concrete partitions, Alan landed with a thud near the edge of the roof. What happened? How did he get so much stronger? Alan clearly wasn't prepared for this. With incredible speed, the devil was once again right in front of the angel in a split second. Alan Atwood was about to use his power, and his hand was filled with the light of fire energy. However, the devil was not going to give him a chance to use this power, and once again delivered crushing blows. Jane clenched her fists in tension. She was very worried about Ryan Howe. In an attempt to catch up with the angel, the devil was smashing everything in his path, not even paying attention to the fact that he was causing himself damage. His might was so strong that few could match him in such a guise. Angel Alan Atwood tried in vain to escape the devil's destructive power. He realized that the devil was now completely transformed, and if the angel continued like this, there was no way he could defeat the devil. Standing on the edge of the office building, Alan let out his trademark nasty smile and said he'd probably let him and his girlfriend get away with it today. "See you soon, devil." The angel threw a farewell and left the scene of the desperate battle. Jane cautiously asked the entity remotely resembling Ryan Howe how he was. The devil's eyes burned with an eerie red light. He heard her call. Jane's eyes glazed over in horror. It seemed dangerous to even blink now. It took a fraction of a second for the devil to be at Jane's side. A clawed paw reached for Jane. "Wake up!" she screamed. Jane yelled for Ryan Howe to come to his senses immediately. The devil kept pulling his arm. Jane clutched at it with all her might. A sharp blow and blood trickled down the powerful black-clawed arm. Jane began to shake. She cried. But it wasn't from pain that Jane cried. The devil had never been able to hurt her. The devil Ryan Howe used his wing to protect the girl from himself. The blood on the devil's hand was his own. In an attempt to stop himself, he tore his wing to the blood. Jane reached for the devil's hand in tears, calling out his name. She told him, "I'm sorry," many times and tried to touch his bloody hand. When Jane realized what had happened, she was very frightened. What was she going to do now? The devil began to slowly reincarnate into Ryan Howe's person. and the first thing he asked Jane was if she was hurt. He jerked his arm with force and pulled it out of the wounded wing. Jane's heart pricked at the realization of the pain Ryan was feeling right now. Ryan Howe smiled and asked Jane not to cry, saying he wasn't in the least bit of pain. But Jane knew she wasn't. She felt his pain echoing throughout her body. Reincarnating almost completely, Ryan Howe leaned back. Jane stopped him from falling by grabbing his arm. "Ah, careful, Ryan Howe." The girl managed to hold Ryan's head with her hand to keep it from hitting the concrete. Ryan Howe quietly marveled that Jane had caught him again, and said it was worthy of the devil's minion. Jane asked him to be quiet and promised to take Ryan home. Ryan Howe asked Jane to tell him something. The girl leaned closer and asked him what he wanted to hear. He only wanted to know that Jane wasn't afraid of him. Without waiting for an answer, Ryan closed his eyes. The teardrops from Jane's eyes fell directly onto his face. With a desperate cry, the girl hugged Ryan Howe. All she wanted now was for him to stay alive. On a wide, luxurious bed lies an injured Alan Atwood. Even in this state, the smile still remains on his face. Nathan stands next to him, wondering how the angel had allowed himself to be beaten so badly. He had warned him that the devil was no match for him. Alan told him to talk less, because the situation had changed. Instead, he asked me to bring him some girls, explaining that he was a man in trouble now. Nathan was strongly against bringing anyone here. He realized that it could get him into serious trouble. Alan Atwood was silent, his eyes closed. Nathan called the angel's name several times, but it did not respond. Nathan noticed that the angel was still breathing. It was the first time Nathan had seen him hurt so badly. He had never realized that Ryan Howe had so much strength. Stepping away from the bed, the man noticed that his entire shirt was stained with the angel's blood. This guy knows how to cause trouble, Nathan thought. I wonder if he really fainted. Nathan suddenly froze, immersed in his own thoughts. Standing in the doorway, he looked at the unconscious Alan and thought about something. While in the kitchen, Nathan Wang grabbed a kitchen knife from the table. He got that knife while standing at Alan's bedside. Or maybe the heavens themselves were giving him this chance now, to finally break that damn deal with the angel. With these thoughts, Nathan raised the knife, intending to strike. Nathan's childhood. The boy stands with his father in front of the door, and the father tells his son to stand silent. At last, they were invited in. Alan Atwood had waited a long time to meet this boy. His father had hidden him away for so long, but now it was time for them to meet. The father introduced Alan to his son, calling him the Lord's favor who blesses and protects the Van Group. Young Nathan did not quite understand what his father was saying. However, they tried to explain to him that Mr. Allen's word is law, and from now on, he will be obliged to obey him. One day, young Nathan witnessed a very creepy scene. When he heard a cry for help from Alan's office, he decided to see what was going on. Alan sat on top of the bloody girl who was lying on the floor, barely alive. She was covered with blood, as was Mr. Allen's mouth. Nathan saw all this, but Alan also noticed him. "You saw. That's good. You would have had to find out sooner or later," he told the boy. Terrified, Nathan ran screaming down the corridor away from this picture. He ran to the phone and dialed the police number. Nathan reported the crime and asked them to come as soon as possible while the woman was still alive. The guy was only asked to give the address. But he didn't have time to do so, for at that moment his father came over and pressed the button to reset the call. Nathan did not understand why his father did this. However, when the phone call was interrupted, the world of the boy named Nathan changed completely. The father brought his shocked son to the clinic and showed him the room with the girls. He explained that all these people would soon recover, because Mr. Atwood did not need their souls, but only their life energy and blood to replenish his own strength. Paul Van promised to make sure that all these people recovered and could leave as soon as they were better. Looking into the room through the glass, Nathan thought it looked more like a prison than a hospital. His father explained that he and his younger brother were different, and that he trusted Nathan more. That day, the boy learned about the deal with the angel, and that the success of the company's business depended only on Mr. Atwood. His father didn't even give the kid a choice, deciding everything for him. The frightened Nathan had no choice but to obey his father and comply with his demands. Present tense. Nathan Wang never dared to carry out his plan. He is now searching for reliable people to take Mr. Alan Atwood to the hospital. The man looked at Alan, but he was still unconscious. Nathan sincerely regretted that he had not been finished off by the devil. This Alan seemed to be a lucky man. 20 minutes later, a white van pulled into an underground parking garage. Alan Atwood is wheeled in on a gurney from the van. Mr. Nathan Wang told the uniformed men to take Mr. Atwood upstairs. I think there's someone else in one of the cars in this parking lot. Jordan Blair watched the scene from his car. Strange. The press conference is supposed to be tomorrow. But what is Nathan Wang doing here in the middle of the night? The guard brought Jane a large box and a sack. They contained the candy she had asked to buy. The man had dutifully bought everything in the nearest stores. He wanted to bring them in, but Jane told him to leave them under the door. From outside the door, the guard heard some strange moans. The man forced himself as hard as he could not to eavesdrop. In the room where the moans could be heard, Jane was bandaging Ryan Howe. He was the one making those wild moans and screams. Almost all of his upper body was already bandaged. Jane told him not to fidget. She wasn't a professional. While the girl is dressing Ryan, he is munching on sweet milk candies. The only sounds he can hear are the unintelligible slurping and growling noises. Jane looked at his back with pain in her soul. The abrasions were huge, and it seemed that even a light touch could hurt the man. Just now she could see his scarred back. But Ryan Howe suffered to protect Jane. Gently touching the abrasions on the man's body, Jane apologized several times. She felt very guilty about what had happened to Ryan. Ryan told her not to talk nonsense because he almost killed her. He sadly stated to Jane that she was stupid and almost died because of her own stupidity. Jane reminded him that her life already belonged to him, so she wasn't afraid to die in Ryan Howe's arms. Jane didn't want to watch Ryan bleed out. She was scared to see him vulnerable and human, scared that the devil could die too. But what she feared most of all was that Ryan would be consumed by a thirst for revenge. Jane confessed that Ryan Howe was very dear to her. Ryan Howe turned sharply to Jane, smiled, and stated that he had one way. He suddenly plucked the feather from his wing. Jane didn't understand why he did it. Ryan saw no reason to be nervous. Ryan Howe then pressed his palm against his chest wound. Jane thought for a moment that he had lost his mind. She really asked him not to put pressure on the wound. What's he doing after all? Ryan Howe said to be patient and soon Jane will know everything. Ryan Howe warned that it would hurt a little and for the girl to be a little patient. With a feather from his wing, soaked in his own blood, Ryan Howe touched it to Jane in the area of her heart. Oh, what did he just do and why? Ryan Howe asked Jane to look at his chest. When Ryan saw that Jane had covered her breasts with her hand, he slapped his forehead, cursing himself for such tactless words. The girl didn't understand what was going on, or what kind of show Mr. Howe was putting on. Jane lowered the collar of her sweater and saw the tattoo of a feather on her chest just below her collarbone. Devil Howe noted that as long as this mark was on Jane, then he wouldn't be able to harm her, even if he lost control of himself. Wow, that's really cool. Jane thought that now she was even more indebted to him. The girl suddenly jumped out of bed and ran to the closet. She searched for something for a while. It turned out she just needed a marker. When Jane found it, she immediately ran over to Ryan and asked him to give her his hand. Ryan Howe didn't understand what Jane wanted to do. I have to give you something in return. Here's my mark, Jane declared proudly, and drew a drawing on the bandages over Ryan Howe's palm. A duck? He asked. But Jane said it was a crane. The girl also added that if the day ever comes and she doesn't recognize him, Ryan should just show her that. Ryan Howe called her drawing childish, joking that he was allergic to ducks. Jane ignored his words and insisted that he get some rest as soon as possible. Tomorrow was a press conference, and there was no telling if he'd have time to recover. Alan Atwood was already lying in a hospital room under the professional care of doctors. You're awake. Feeling better? Nathan asked as soon as his master regained consciousness. Alan asked if Nathan could not see how he had been treated. He did not have to ask. Nathan clucked his tongue in displeasure. Still, he had to ask Alan not to get so angry. He was puzzled why the two deities couldn't solve their problems peacefully. It seemed that all this time Alan hadn't even suspected that the devil existed. However, the angel stated that as long as the devil was around that woman, nothing would be resolved peacefully. What woman? Alan said her name was Jane Blair. He supposed that Nathan was probably not concerned, but that her father was not a favorite subject in the Van family. Jane Blair, Nathan repeated in amazement. One day, Nathan asked his father why their company was called Van Group. His father told him that he had founded the company with a friend, but he was not a man who liked to share with others and believed that being soft-hearted would not help him succeed. Alan Atwood explained to the boy then that his father, contrary to what he said, was just Jordan Blair's henchman. He just has more vices, and he's more conniving and greedy. That was why the angel, who loved such dirty people, had chosen Nathan's father. Nathan Wang always remembered the angel's words that his whole family were thieves, and he was the son of thieves. Nathan became nervous. Did Jane really want to take the company away for her father? Angel laughed and said that Nathan overestimates her, because the girl still doesn't know about the situation. The only thing she does is to dig into the VIP group's case. Nathan Van did not understand what Jane had to do with this, and Alan reminded him of the girl from the company who had killed herself. When Nathan remembered, the angel explained that the girl had been a close friend of Jane Blair. Is that what this is all about? Nathan was willing to pay whatever it took just to make it stop, and for Jane to stop prying into their affairs. Alan emphasized that Jane had given her soul to the devil, and if she was to pay, it would have to be with the money of the dead. Nathan suggested that they could just try to talk to her, in case she decided to give up her revenge. And if I don't? Alan asked with a sly smile. He was almost 100% sure that Jane would not even listen to Nathan. As he left, Nathan replied that Jane would be completely at his disposal in that case. Alan Atwood licked his lips dreamily, anticipating the girl's negative response to Nathan's proposal. He would be looking forward to it,